Our next speaker is Dr. Eric Braverman. Never was a braver man. He has changed the whole field of medicine and anti-aging medicine by telling us our brains are important, a neglected organ before Dr. Braverman came along. He has pushed this field into prominence in many ways and really made a difference as a researcher and a clinician. So it's an honor to have my friend Eric here right now.
Good, thank you, Ron. I've learned more from you than any other teacher here, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see. Are the slides up? Okay, so our first problem that we have, in fact, Ron, I think you'll enjoy this, is that the first problem we have with growth hormone is the name growth hormone. The problem is because when first time people hear it, they immediately think, oh my God, what are you going to grow on me? A third ear, a second nose, another arm, you're going to grow a tumor on me, etc. So the first hurdle is, why do we have growth hormone as we get older? What's it doing? I mean, am I getting longer fingers? I'm just getting a bigger nose? And the answer is that basically repair is a type of controlled growth. So repair is a type of controlled growth, meaning that the body has to use the insulin system to repair itself. There's a doctor in our office who's an Indian American, and he said to me that it really convinced me how damaging it is. He said, you know, I just can't understand how 500 years after America was discovered, we're still calling Cherokee Indians. They're not from India. They're not from the subcontinent. They're not savage. I mean, I grow up and I hear my name, Indians chopped off the tomahawk off someone's head and washed, actually with George Washington, they actually washed their hands in the brain tissue. And he says, these are savage, you know, this was a different thing. And that name has stuck for 500 years. Most people don't realize there's other funny names in our society, and they stick, whether it's the Philistines and the Palestinians, trying to say that basically Goliath beat David. This name is your biggest problem with growth hormone. It's your biggest problem because there was a market that was made that is an extremely weak market. That extremely weak market is that you can make your kids taller with growth hormone. Now, maybe if you take it for 16 or 17 years, from age 2 on, you might get how many inches, Dr. Rothenberg? How many? 0 to 10 centimeters. So that is a very impressive expense for very little height that may be obtainable by zinc, D, antioxidants. My hunch is it's at best a 2-inch, $350,000 child investment. So now you got the problem, though. Once associated as gigantism, you know, you have these guys that are, how big were they in the Sherlock Holmes movie? Like this 9-foot guy, and they say Goliath was 9 feet. And I read today in the Book of Chronicles of a 7'5" Egyptian. So it's well known, you know, that the pituitary gland was the source of this gigantism, since it's no surprise that Goliath gets a hit right here in the forehead. But it doesn't really seem to grow normal people much. So who knows what the IGF-1 level is of giants? Not the New York Giants. Giants. Dr. Rothenberg, what's an IGF-1 of a good acromegaly guy?
They're, you know, 700, 1100,
yeah, 980,
1100,
1100, 1200, yeah. Levels that are
nobody's
typical
rich enough to
12-year-olds.
Huh?
Basically, a gigantism person is basically a 10-year-old person who stayed hormonally 10, and he just kept growing, and those levels are the same levels that a 10-year-old has, right? And they hit puberty, and they're supposed to go down, they don't, and they just keep up. So now you got a big problem, is you have levels of 1100 that cause this gigantism, but my patient is going to say to me, you're going to make me grow something. So this adds a lot of expense and complexity. I won't digress too much on it, but PET scans then can show patients they don't have any lumps or bumps. and they're not, or they have, in fact, contrary to what I said, everybody has lumps, bumps, nodules, precancers, and therefore they can be monitored and proven not to grow with repair hormone. What do they call it? Repair hormone. So it needs to be retitled repair hormone. So that said, that is your biggest problem, is that almost everybody is scared they're going to grow something. Remember the kind of levels, maybe it's worth saying, the kind of levels that 80-year-old people have are 80. And the kind of levels that people can have great chronic disease reversal are 200 or 275. And the kind of levels that used to be standard was 443. So I don't really think there's any significant growth of anything until you get to levels of 900 in that range. So in terms of growing, in terms of outside of the normal repair process. So let's go over the strategy to convince medical boards and everybody else, and things have changed a lot. One is medicine. First thing you need to know so you can protect yourself and teach your patient is that things have changed a lot already. TSH range, right, has changed from where? 10 to 2.5. So this is important because you can say to somebody that the range that you're reading in your laboratory is subject to a lot of different variables and opinions. And this is widely recognized that subclinical hypothyroidism occurs at 2. In fact, it's gone further. Recently, the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism said, if you have a nodule, which is half the patients that go through their ultrasound physicals at Path Medical, their TSH should be kept between 0.1 and 0.4. So that they basically are saying, whether they know it or not, that patients who have nodules have microgoiters and are mildly hypothyroid at 2.4 because they're still growing goiters. So now you have a total transformation in the field. And then with T3 and T4, we've come to recognize that human beings don't seem to do well with horse hormones and other hormones. And what we came to recognize, we can imitate the thyroid. The thyroid makes 2 core hormones, T3 and T4. For 50 years, conventional endocrinologists said, only use Synthroid. They tried to overrule me since I've been in medicine. And they missed the fact that the psychiatrists would only use T3 to augment antidepressants and help out mood, and to augment a lot of different other psychiatric situations. The bottom line is we prevailed in this anti-aging movement over the last 15 years, and now T3 and T4 have become very much common, frequently standard, and they've been compounded to avoid the viruses that are in dead glandulars, or what's, basically street animals that got hit by a car. They scoop up the thyroid, they repackage it and ship it to you, and they call it a desiccated glandular thyroid. Have a great drink. And that turned out to have viruses that could kill you, like Jacob-Creutzfeldt virus, both cow and pork. And now you have pure compounded T3, T4. Another place where endocrinology is shifting, and this is, this becomes an argument to reasonable physicians, is parathyroid. 4 purple glands that almost nobody seems to know about. Always a good joke for patients to remind them that human beings have green gallbladders, yellow bile, red blood, blue blood, gray brains, purple parathyroids, and a rainbow of colors, and skin doesn't seem to alter that. And parathyroid levels are unique in that they are constantly being lowered because we now get a GFR equation on every single chem screen that we get, or a value, and most older Americans have mild kidney disease. They have GFRs of 60, stage 3 kidney disease, they've had some blood pressure, they're overweight, and it's important to utilize vitamin D to keep parathyroid suppressed, but even parathyroid injections themselves also suppress the parathyroid from being on all the time. So it's a unique organ. In addition, this is very important because it can save the country from massive amounts of expensive dialysis by maintaining a lower parathyroid, to the point that Zemplar is approved by kidney specialists to give 500,000 units, not 50,000 that I use all the time, but 500,000 D3 equivalents to lower parathyroid levels. Parathyroid levels can go up to 500 in kidney failure patients. They need to stay 35 and below for you. If you can, they stay when you inject parathyroid. And what they do is, once again, you have a way of saying, when I take growth hormone and I take patients on it, I look at the symphony of hormones from the new endocrinological data that has shifted over a decade to result in parathyroid levels being kept lower, TSH being kept lower, DHEA levels being kept higher. So all this has resulted in more and more better endocrinology and better health for patients. And the thing we always have to remember is the data on thyroid, just to say it one more time, is ultrasound. And what you get out of the ultrasound physical of the thyroid is something phenomenal. 5 thyroid cancers a year in our office, and this is what the endocrinologist says when he gets them, or the surgeon. I felt the patient with my hands, and I couldn't see it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't find it. How did you find it? Well, there's an old saying about looking upon people's heart, not their appearance, and listening to their words rather than their makeup. And the bottom line is their ultrasound is so superior to fingers that I've actually given in my will my hands to the Museum of Archaic Medical Devices. So my hands will be cut at my death after they're pinned up somewheres, and they will be donated to the museum. Meaning we're in the Star Trek age, whether you like it or not, Mr. Insurance Company. All right, meaning a computer does a better physical everywhere. Okay, and there's the kidney stuff about the kidney stone if you want references and kidney disease. But there are thousands of references on this now, how important it is to utilize D to keep parathyroid down and what the natural parathyroid. Now, since I was last lectured, Dr. Rothenberg, I got something new for you even. They used to claim, first of all, that parathyroid injections lowered the levels of parathyroid to 0, but it had no clinical significance, said the expert at Eli Lilly to me, who also helped write the textbook, Dr. Marcus, called Osteoporosis. Then he changed his mind and said maybe it actually controls the hyperparathyroid of aging. So remember, aging is marked by FSH up, LH up, cortisol up, parathyroid up, blood pressure up, function, frump. All right? Then I thought to myself, they said I can only give it 2 years. I said, 2 years? Well, I'm looking out in this hall right now, and I noticed a lot of you that are under 50 have parathyroid levels already that have been in your body self-injecting for 30 years. So how did they ever come up with this 2-year? And I can tell you why. Because that was the only way they could get it approved. Because they had a few rats who got, what? Bone cancers. The problem with rats, human model, is maybe some of you are strict evolutionists more than I am, but as a general rule, most people are not rats. There are some that are, and definitely are part of that species. But as a rule, the rat to human model doesn't work. As you know, what happens to a rat who takes vitamin D? Who knows? Dies. Vitamin D is poisonous. And coumadin is rat poison, and yet to a human it's good. So when I did a study of coumadin in rats and versus human in rats, rats all died. Okay? So coumadin is rat poison. They bleed and they die from it. All right, so now we're at this. So now we got good news. You can now take a year off and continue to take Forteo. Why is that important? Because Forteo, combined with growth hormone, still only gets you 2 standard deviations of height repair or bone repair. So basically, if you look at an old lady who's like this, or an old man who's short, or my Uncle Jaime and Aunt Gert at the last wedding I went to that had said they lost 6 inches, They are -4. They did. They lost 6 inches. They said it wasn't due to a hammer. They said it was due to aging. And -4 can only go to -2 or so. Now, really solid bone people, the best athletes and clutch people, calcium is in constant flux with the brain and nervous system. They are sometimes +4. The difference between osteoporotic catastrophe and a healthy, a strong bone young athlete may be 9 standard deviations. The fixing of the frame, and a problem is, you can memorize this, weak frame almost always means weak brain. That's why all the new drugs from, even this new nutritional thing, jellyfish, is all about impacting the calcium channels in the brain. Basically, aging is this. You burn up, dry up, swell up, turn to stone or calcium, get choked to death by your own blood supply, rust from all the pesticides and heavy metals, and then you're called an oldakaka. That one place of calcification is stopped by preventing the demineralization of your frame. And your brain will calcify in the plaques and everything else. And so you must fix your frame. All right, DHEA is important, and now the whole survey of hormones. Now to add one more, which I didn't think of, actually 2 more that I didn't think of when I did this, in this list, 2 more ideas, is to see if you look down, glucagon-like peptides, everyone's now using Byetta and Victoza. But Dr. Smeda in my office said to me, I bet you that Byetta will be able to be used at a hemoglobin A1C of 5.7 as a solo agent soon enough. And soon enough, it's being used now and approved for first-line agent. What does that do for you? What it does for you is your expert witness, if you ever get into trouble with growth hormone, since it should be called repair hormone, your expert witness has to know his endocrinology history of testosterone. I'm not going to do testosterone. When he just did with testosterone, you got Adrian Dobbs at Hopkins, who is now nonstop head of the internal medicine program and integrated medicine program at Hopkins, and using testosterone as an adjuvant in 15 illnesses and recommending it. Another area that we don't have here, and some of the other areas which I haven't added yet, but I want to not forget, is that an enormous number of Americans have fatty liver, in which new studies suggest the #1 metabolic cause of NALFD, non-alcoholic liver function disease, or fatty liver disease, is insulin as growth hormone, IGF-BP3, IGF-1. All right, so, and there's a basic concept that human beings are made in the image of a higher power, and then there's another concept that human beings are descended from apes. Men are definitely from apes, women are probably from a higher power, but in the case of bioidentical hormones, it appears that it doesn't do very well for either set. So women, just, if you thought that you would do well, that you were a horse. I know a lot of women have that image that they're a horse. I don't think so. But the bottom line is, somehow, some crazy doctor thought that women could take horse hormones and they can make a lot of money. A lot of money they made, but not a lot of health. So medroxyprogesterones, cadaver growth hormone, birth control pills, diethylstilbestrol, methyl testosterone, black box warnings galore, and catastrophes. In fact, you should challenge any doctor to give you one example of a successful non-bioidentical hormone, and that is difficult to come up with. In fact, the doctors that do recommend the non-bioidenticals, when they go to heaven, apparently they end up with horse skin transplants. Okay. Next. The next argument you're going to bump into a growth hormone. So he gave that thing about it's not growth, and that you should look at it in this spectrum of blood levels and clinical function of all the endocrine hormones. The next thing you're going to be told is, why didn't you do a stim test? The good news is, stim tests are impossible to do these days because no one can find Geron or GRF and all the other things. In addition, kids die from stim tests, so pretty much people have been cutting back on them, and there's lots of side effects, and basically, I don't have much faith in those, and the best thing about them at all is the Quest Laboratory, which I think is a pretty good source for medical information, said that IGF-1 is good enough. And when Quest comes out and says that IGF-1 is good enough, and you have a concept of using the growth hormone not just for treating adult growth hormone deficiency, but treating chronic illness, now you've entered in another era of clinical judgment and protection. Why? Because DHEA is used for lupus as an adjuvant agent. Because thyroid is used all over psychiatry as an adjuvant agent. Because Byetta is used all over diabetic medicine as a second and third and fourth agent. So growth hormone can be used as an additive to Forteo, an additive to treat fatty liver, an additive to treat dementia, and because they just showed a new study which came out recently of IGF-1 plus the acetylcholinesterases were more effective, an adjuvant all over the place. I'm not certain how good your notes have to be, but the bottom line is it is a very successful adjuvant, and then you have to show that you're measuring blood levels in their increase. And all these other clinical areas, insulin may work. I haven't found it as good as I hope with insulin sensitivity, but impaired cardiac function, there is an insert, I think, in the growth hormone literature, I haven't checked it recently, that says that it can be used for heart failure and that it's actually a well-recognized improvement. In my case, we use it for heart failure all the time, and much to my shock, I have patients whose atriums have not basically burst at 9 and 10 centimeters. Now, how many of you knew that a human being could live with a left atrium of 10 centimeters? I didn't know. I mean, you know, they say AFib starts at 4.2, you know, and 4.4, but somehow this guy injecting 2-3 milligrams of growth hormone, we've seen them go to 7, 8, 9 centimeters, 10 centimeters now before they die. And so there's another incredible advantage. Growth hormone in psychiatry, without a doubt, of great importance. But calling it growth hormone is a problem, because what it's really doing is repairing neuronal dendritic attachments, repairing sarcomeres, repairing the connections between internal bone structures and bone cartilage, improving muscle strength, improving cardiac function, improving health in general. All right. So IGF-1 levels below 159 seem to be a problem. Some people want to take levels below 100, so let's go over levels again. Pituitary tumor, I have the patients, 1100. Young people, 700, 800. By the time you get to adulthood, you're down to a very much lower level, 450 at 20 years old. What's happening? Unfortunately, nature is discarding us. I don't want to be part of nature. I want to live. And the bottom line is that the repair processes of the human body, you go into repair debt. So another name for growth hormone deficiency is repair debt of aging. And that repair debt at least begins at 150 or so, probably begins at 275. Patients, another thing they want us to do with growth hormone, another argument endocrinologists make, is you should find other pituitary dysfunction hormones. This is fairly rare. And in fact, I think we did a study that certainly less than 5% of patients who have IGF-1s that are clearly deficient, these patients still don't have low FSH, low LH, low ACTH. They just don't have a group of widespread pituitary hormone dysfunctions. And basically the pituitary may be connected, but it's really more like thyroid and parathyroid. What do I mean by that? What I'm saying is the pituitary's functions are very segregated, yet the conventional endocrinologist used to approach this problem that you should have growth hormone deficiency and multiple growth pituitary deficiencies as proof that the pituitary is sick. That is not the case. And so it may happen, but it happens very, very rarely. These patients that have IGF-1s under 100 are notoriously sarcopenic, meaning they have horrible muscles. Without good muscle mass, you don't have angiogenesis repair. So you do not have blood vessel repair at an IGF-1 of 100. In fact, basically they all look decrepit, and they have other good pituitary function, and they generally look horrible, weak, fragile, all the things that anybody who wants more abundant life doesn't want to become as they get older. So that's another hurdle to overcome, though, because they ask you questions like, where's the multiple pituitary hormone dysfunction? And then you start seeing healthy people ranges much higher. Now, my hunch is that, Dr. Rothenberg, you're comfortable with levels of 400, 450 in older people, or no? You are.
There's 20-year-olds walking around like that, so why couldn't a 40-year-old, 50-year-old do it?
So I get, the only reason I get nervous is that I'm in New York and he's in California, and you can surf in California and be more relaxed, and he gets along better with people than I do, and so he can get away with it. But my hunch is he's right, that levels of, as long as you don't have edema and blood sugar changes, levels up around 350 look really good. But we're generally in our office 275. All right, and most of the studies that I got into, and I got this into the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, were all, in that range of 275, and they've shown that they had a lot of health improvements in even conditions that you don't think are going to benefit, such as cancer conditions. I don't treat ever growth hormone patients that have active cancer with growth hormone. It's just too dangerous to do, except in one case, an ALS patient. Even the Hopkins researchers agree with me. The patient is so growth hormone deficient, so weak, that you should be using anabolic steroids and growth hormone to strengthen the patient regardless of a low-grade prostate cancer, since the likelihood of death with prostate cancer was 10 years, and the likelihood of death from ALS and other types of lateral sclerosing diseases can be a year, 6 months, less. Okay. Other studies, even in JAMA, showed benefits on abdominal fat. And look at these studies. Right there, sitting in JAMA, blood levels 146 to what did I say is your magic number of safety. This is your magic number of safety in about, literally, 50 studies. 275, 267. That's the kind of things they're looking. To raise IGF-1 up 100 points and get changes and document the medical change. And then you have a model that only crazy people would fight you on, and you say, it's like, I gave my blood pressure pill, I brought my patient back for blood pressure levels, I gave my Crestor, and I brought a niacin, I brought my patient back for a lipid check, I raised the HDL to 60, I lowered my LDL to 70, I changed the patient with HIV, I made them stronger, I got their weight loss, I lowered their triglycerides. How can you argue with success? People do, because it turns out that good works and good deeds are not necessarily what medicine's about. If you didn't know that by now, it's taken me a long time to understand that medicine is not about repairing patients. It is about getting as many gallbladders, uteruses, breasts as possible, and getting as many operations as you can, prescribing as many drugs as can be done, cutting back as much outpatient care as you can, diminishing early diagnosis as much as you can. And therefore, every day I know of doctors that used to be, until I published my paper with the Commissioner of Health on leptin levels recently, I know of doctors constantly calling me saying, I'm being bothered for patients I help. Okay. Risks of being in the lower range of IGF-1 are massive, and people in the low ranges of IGF-1 are constantly sick. Obesity, not as impressed by growth hormone, and the reason why is it more relates to leptin levels, and sometimes patients are growth hormone resistant. Probably Increlex will be better, or pure IGF-1 in the obese patient, but that's also expensive and hard to get. And the reality is that we now know something incredible about obesity, and I'll give you a argument first. The first argument that you should know is what we know about diabetes. The history of diabetes, which adds to your endocrine knowledge, is diabetes was diagnosed with hemoglobin A1C of 7.5. Then it was lowered to 7. Then it was lowered to 6.5. Now it's called pre-diabetic between 5, 7, and 6.5. Okay? So that is a whole new understanding of diabetes. Back to the levels discussion. Leptin levels. What we learned with obesity is simply this. The typical 35-year-old woman is 5'5", 135 pounds, and her BMI is 26 or 27, and she's not obese according to BMI. And then when she goes to get a leptin level, it's a level of 20, and her actual DEXA measured body fat is 10 points higher. So your typical 35-year-old woman is 32% body fat, leptin of 10 to 15, BMIs of 24 and 25, with leptin levels needing to be lowered by many, many things. Estrogen vaginally, ergoginia, carnitine, better night's sleep, opening your airways, more exercise, which is by far your number one also growth hormone stimulator, and unless the leptin levels drop below 5, you cannot get remission in obesity of end organ damage. We know this is true with blood pressure. There are certain places we have to drop blood pressure to avoid end organ damage and not to lower GFR. We know that we want to lower, in the case of, basically, in the case of leptin, below 5. In men, we also know the BMI is ridiculous, and men, like our pro athletes that use growth hormone, they may get some leptin lowering, but what we found was those individuals that are in great shape will have, take a guy sort of like me, I wouldn't say I'm in great shape at the moment, but 5'10", 175, will have a BMI of 25. If his leptin level is 2 or 3, which is typically mine, your body fat will be 14%. So now with men that have leptin under 5, you can subtract 10 points, and if those who are 1, you can subtract sometimes 15 points. That's how often. The BMI is only accurate in predicting fat 50% of the time. Why does that relate to growth hormone? Because who is obese depends on adiposity, not weight. Many people are 5'10", 220 and muscular, and some people are 5'9", like my models in New York that are 5'9", 112 pounds with 36% body fat. All right? And they're just basically flabby noodles. And the bottom line is fitness counts for more for health. Why? Because muscle is the way that the brain makes circulatory factors, and that's the key. All right, so we continue to cognitive decline. We're now in an era of cognitive decline medicine that we recognize from 40 on, people are declining. The typical MRI and MRA in my office of 50-year-olds shows mild atrophy, sometimes atrophy of the hippocampus or amygdala, frequently blood vessel changes in the patients with cognitive problems, and stunning upon stunning results. Hypoplastic circle of Willis, missing cerebral blood vessels in the front part of the brain, and terrible outcomes. In addition, those patients on PET scan, particularly women who lost estrogen, have a huge frequency of pre-dementia. Their PET scans are positive. So much so, the diagnosis of pre-dementia, better known as mild cognitive impairment, moderate cognitive impairment, has been perfected by 4 domains of impairment, which could be memory, attention, processing speed, judgment, executive function. There's like 15 different things. In addition, low voltage, low processing speed in the brain, low thought or slow thought to action, meaning that you know how basically you drive next to an 80-year-old person. In their brain, they thought to go into the right lane. But the time to go, from the time they thought to go to the time they actually move, is 100 milliseconds slower than a person who's sharp. All of these neuronal markers are improved by growth hormone. There are papers on growth hormone improving memory, early dementia, hypometabolic PET scans, atrophy on MRI, blood vessel disease in the brain, and a host of other dimensions. This one's the most stunning that I pulled out, which is the growth hormones neurogenesis, that when I went to medical school, to put in perspective, I was told that the brain could not grow a cell. I was told that lead was safe at 80 parts per million. Then it went to 60 by the EPA, 40, 20, 10. Does anyone read the paper? What happened last week? Safety of lead in children was lowered to 5. Okay, my first book in 1976 was on zinc and lead and zinc and other nutrients. Moni DeLeon at NYU and a host of my friends all do these research papers saying your brain shrinks. All right, I remember what I told you. Aging is all summarized in this little 7 sing-song. You dry up, you burn up, you dry up, you swell up, you turn to stone, calcify, you rust to death by toxic metals and pesticides, you get choked to death by your blood supply, and then you're called an old akaka. Growth hormone, by far, one of the biggest neurogenesis impactor, along with testosterone, estrogen, other hormones, and the whole symphony of approaches that are here at anti-aging medicine, including fish oil, resveratrol, cumin. If we're going to have quality of life and break the aging barrier and sustain incredible mental function, repair hormone is simply key. You can't maintain intellectual function with age without getting an IGF-1 of 275. What I see is everybody's hippocampus shrinking. And now the way you can ask, I know this is, if it's new to me, it's going to be new to some of you. You have to put down and ask your radiologist, and this is another way to protect you, because you get a scan that's an MRI, MRA, and you have to put neuroquantification of hippocampal volume. That's the only way you'll get it. And you have to speak to the radiologist and ask him and demand it. You will then have now multiple reasons for clinical adjuvant use of growth hormone. My typical 60-year-old user of growth hormone has osteopenia, osteoporosis, blood vessel disease, lipid changes, quality of life changes, MRI, shrinkage, atrophy, and hippocampal atrophy. And so it's easy to now say to another clinician, this agent, I don't know of another agent that can impact so many of the chronic diseases of aging. And with this literature, I didn't even go outside the range, since you remember a lot of the old range was 443 for IGF-1, and I didn't deviate from standards of care of not testing before and after the patient. You have a whole new, I think, safety margin. I'm not a big fan of doing this, as I told you, so we're not going to skip it. There is an important thing to learn from this. There are plenty of 10-year safety records. Remember, the hardest problem we still have is we need to get growth hormone relabeled repair hormone of aging. I don't know when that will occur or if it will ever occur in our lifetimes, but that is really what it's doing. It is a repair hormone of aging, growing virtually nothing at good levels. Now, what I want you to notice is, watch the serum IGF-1. And we'll just turn around for 1 second and show you. Each year, 300, they didn't raise the supplementation. So by year 5, you've gone from 300 to 256. In the 10th year, you're starting to get, in this study, you're getting a blood droppage of IGF-1 to 223. So aging itself is marked by an inability to repair. What you have to tell patients, if you want to be on the tell the truth, and truth sets you free, is you have to tell patients as they age that you've come in today. Today I can get you testosterone, growth hormone, DHEA, I can lower your blood sugar, and I can raise your IGF-1 of 150 to 275. But you come back to me in 2-3 years, and I may only be able to raise growth hormone levels with 1 or 2 milligrams to 180, 150. So growth hormone resistance occurs. Now, how do we get around that? If someone comes to you too late, hopefully they don't come to you after they're dead. That's a very difficult task. But the bottom line is IGF-1 Increlex, I wish that we could get more access to it. It's very difficult to get. And clearly those patients, particularly women, when they sometimes get estrogen supplemented, can't raise growth hormone levels properly, nor can women make sufficient muscle mass. Without muscle mass, cognitive parity between men and women is difficult. It's just a problem. You need muscle mass to have blood flow adequate throughout the body. And you have, by nature, just in this one study, a typical drop with the same dosages of 100 points, all right, or 80 points, 120 points. So the problem with age is you don't even absorb the growth hormone that well. And IGF-1 levels just don't can march the way they should. So in summary, the growth hormone major findings, it's huge in the concussion movement. So right now, I should tell you that we do a concussion history on every patient who gets the brain map. 25% of the patients that come to a neuropsychiatric office have had significant head trauma. The board-certified neurologist that worked for me for a while from Weill Cornell Medical School, where I'm at as well, never did a concussion history on one patient. I had to convince him that it should be done in writing. Another major area of underutilization of growth hormone therapy. Brain processing speed, another area. IQ improvement, another area. Sarcopenia, osteoporosis, other areas. When you do a DEXA scan, most women get sarcopenic obesity. Sarcopenic obesity is you're 5'5", 125, but when you're naked, you're 35% body fat, and you understand you're flabby, but you don't understand why. You have a leptin deficiency, growth hormone deficiency, sarcopenic obese status, with sometimes insulin sensitivity. You got improvement of anterior pituitary deficiencies. You don't have to prove them. And then finally, let's see if there's anything that's critical. There's studies on Alzheimer's combining. And as a general rule, the STIM test is a failure. And we'll summarize basically, I think, everything at this point, since it's at 3 minutes. Summarize. Growth hormone needs to be relabeled repair hormone. Growth hormone impacts 10-15 diseases as an adjuvant. Growth hormone will help Forteo reverse osteoporosis, will help rivastigmine reverse dementia partially, will help resveratrol work, it'll help testosterone work at lower doses so you don't have to end up phlebotomizing yourself potentially, that you don't have to end up with a high hematocrit and hemoglobin. Growth hormone is an adjuvant part of the symphony of hormones that's critical if we're going to have basically a quality of life. And probably growth hormone is really a central reason that psychiatry is such a failure and continues to grow into one of the largest industries of drug utilization. It turns out so many of these psychiatric patients that come and see me can cut down on their medicines if they can sustain building a frame. In fact, the #1 white male presentation of schizophrenics and depression in my practice is a thin white male with growth hormone deficiency, osteopenia or porosis, a history of celiac or gluten insensitivity that was never identified, and basically, I'm saying to you, because we don't use growth hormone where it should be used in adolescence, we end up with more psychiatric patients than we should, and that bulk of psychiatry is really a neuroendocrine disorder. So the only thing else I can say is my 15th year of teaching here. It's really an honor to speak to you. I hope I can help you more, and anyone needs me to answer more questions afterwards. I think some of the big paradigm shifts are to remember that endocrinology is shifting. More and more doctors are definitely using growth hormone at different centers, NYU, Weill Cornell, and they're asking me questions on how to utilize it safely. There's very few side effects. The key is to remember also in dosing to go up slowly, 0.2, 0.4. Women do fluid retention. Sometimes you have to use a diuretic. That will get rid of the fluid retention. And then hemoglobin A1Cs may need to be checked in some patients. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak. And may you repair yourself safely without growing anything.